Boker Tov, good morning, everybody.
Boker Tov.
And Chag Sameach, it's Lag BaOmer. Okay. Of all things that should come right now. So we're gonna divide our study together this morning into two parts. One part about Lag BaOmer and the other one about this week's Parsha. And I think you'll see at the end, if I worked it out right, they'll all come together. So, and I think at no more appropriate moment than this one that we're currently living through. So let's begin with our traditional bracha to prepare us and get our heads and our hearts and our minds ready to engage in some Torah study. And then we're going to take a look at some texts that I hope you'll find interesting, both ancient and contemporary as well. So if you'll join with me, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu asok divrei Torah. We bless and praise you, O Lord, our God, ruling Spirit of the universe, for you have given us the extraordinary privilege and opportunity to engage in the study of your sacred text. Okay, so this morning is Lag BaOmer, okay? The 33rd day in the Omer. What's the Omer? What, has anyone ever seen an Omer? No. No, nobody's ever seen an Omer. So what is an Omer? Okay, the Omer is was originally the special wave offering that took place in the ancient temple in Jerusalem. By the way, I may have mentioned this before. If I did, then just humor me. And if I didn't, it'll be something that I hope will be both new and something where you go, oh, wow, yeah. So if one faces, one is always supposed to incline their hearts towards Jerusalem and face towards Jerusalem. I got a report from my brother the other day that standing in front of the great synagogue in Jerusalem, which is located on King George Street, right next to the seat of the chief rabbinate of all of the trouble, the chief rabbinate of Israel. In any case, the great synagogue, that currently no services are being held in the great synagogue because of the coronavirus. So instead, men, as would be the case in the great synagogue, gather in front of the great synagogue. Those of you who have walked by it or have gone in know that there's a kind of a section in the front. The building is kind of set back, and so there's an open section, like a square, in front, just off the sidewalk, and so men are gathering 6 feet apart in order to daven, to do the morning service in the afternoon and again the evening service. And they're not facing towards the building. Of course not. They're facing towards the old city. They're facing towards the Kotel, where the temple was. Okay, and my brother, who happens to be kind of sequestered in Jerusalem right now at his son's place, he said to me, I've always known that we're supposed to face Jerusalem when we pray, but it really struck me in a most unusual way, because usually we're in a building and somebody will say, where's Jerusalem, or they know that the ark is facing Jerusalem, but in this case there was a conscious decision of all of these men who were standing there turning and facing, and that he said to me, it was a very powerful image for me as I walked by them. My brother's not a davener, so he just walked by them. But so if you face Jerusalem, or if you face the Kotel, you're facing the western wall. If you allow your eyes to think of it, all those of you who have been there already, if you allow your eyes to go all the way to the end of the western wall, you'll pass by what is called Robinson's Arch, which was the arch. It's the remaining piece of the archway that was a walkway from where the high priests had lived on the top of Jerusalem, because they never lived in the bottom parts. This is a mountain range, so they never lived in the bottom parts, because that's where all the garbage went, and all the refuse went. The Kohanim, who were considered the highest class, lived on the top. And in order to get to the Temple Mount, they would have to walk down through the crevices and the valleys, and God forbid they should do that. So they built a walkway, an archway, in which they could walk directly and in a sense, never have any contact with the day-to-day people. Okay. My guess is that in the time of pandemic, they didn't wear masks either. Okay. So, so there's the last remnant, which is called Robinson's Arch. Just below Robinson's Arch is the egalitarian section of the Kotel for folks like you and me who don't want to be involved in a political battle over who has entitlement to the Kotel, but want to be able to pray with our spouses. And then the construction makes a sharp turn, a 90-degree turn, and along that turn is a section called the southern wall. And the southern wall, if you get up close and personal to it, you will see that the southern wall has a series of steps that go from the wall all the way down till you can't see them anymore because they're hidden. And they actually go down below the road and go all the way down to the valley, which is called Silwan. Okay. And if you were to go there, and you can today, if you were to go there, you'll pass what's called the Ir David, the city of David, okay, which we think was where King David had his first capital. And then going further down, you come to what archaeologists believe to have been the pool of Siloam, or of Silwan, which was where the priests and anybody else would gather to spiritually cleanse themselves, a kind of mikveh, before they would go up to the Temple Mount area. And that the priests would regularly and on special days, like today, would walk up the steps. By the way, we know that the steps exist, that all of the steps exist intact, because the steps at the top have been completely revealed, and the steps at the bottom have been revealed, and the only thing separating them is all of the centuries of debris that accumulated on top of the steps. And the only reason the archaeologists haven't removed all that debris is because it's costly, time-consuming, and they have what they consider other important projects to work on, because they don't need to have evidence of this. They know it's there. Someday they'll clear it away, and the steps will be there. Anyways, the priests would walk up with a certain cadence while they recited psalms or songs, some of the same psalms or songs that we recite when we have our religious services. Esa Enai is one good example. I lift up my eyes to the mountains, from whence where will my help come? Okay. Among others, Ma Tovu Ohalecha, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob. Anybody who's ever sung in the temple choir knows all of these songs, because they've sung all of them for us on the high holidays. And Carol, am I right?
Yes.
Right? Yeah, we sing all of them. Okay. So they would walk with a certain cadence until they got to the very top, and then they would go into the special sections that were cordoned off for the priests, the Kohanim, in the Temple Mount, to be able to do the sacrificial cult, and then later the services that were held there. And it would be during the Omer, during this 49-day period. Some actually say 50. That's a bit of a political difference. But the 49-day period, 7 weeks from Passover until Shavuot, where they would recite special psalms and wave an offering, so to speak, of barley sheaves. Okay, now let's, saying all of that, we're going to go to the text. Okay, so let's take a look at the first text that we have here. Okay, anybody want to read it for us? And I'm not able to see everybody, so anybody who wants to read, just start to read it. Leviticus 23.
And from the day on which you bring the sheep of elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, you shall count off 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then you shall bring an offering of new grain to the Lord.
Okay, so that's all that they're told. Okay, no specific meaning. You should do this because you sinned, because you built a golden calf, or because you allowed yourself to be enslaved in Egypt. None of that. Just simply bring this elevation offering, this omer. Okay, and that's the actual word that is used. Okay, avichem et omer hatanufa. Okay, this offering, elevated offering. That's all that we know about it. Okay, now let's see what the rabbis do with this notion of bringing an offering, by the way, of new grain. That's a critical piece here, of new grain. What would be new grain at this time of year in Israel, in times of antiquity?
But it cannot be new grain at this time of the year because it is warm in Israel, and they can get wheat or whatever similar to wheat crops twice a year.
Correct.
It is over the winter crops that they get at this time.
Correct. And the primary winter crop back then would have been not wheat, but barley.
Oh, whatever. This is why I said wheat or something like wheat. I didn't emphasize only wheat.
Very good. Very helpful. Okay. And by the way, this is by the way the most beautiful time of the year to be in Israel. If any of you have plans to go to Israel in the next couple of years, go the first week of May. Most beautiful time. I was there the end of February and the beginning of March. It's amazing I was able to get back to the United States. I didn't know if my plane was going to take off or not. And all I kept saying to my wife was, look how beautiful, because this particular past year, Israel has had an unusual amount of rain. In fact, the Sea of Galilee, okay, the Kinneret, has reached its highest level before it can overflow. Okay, that's the highest level that it can possibly get from this particular year. All, of course, before the pandemic. Now, so barley was the primary item that was used in the Omer offering, barley. Now, how many of you eat a lot of barley?
I did.
Really? Tell me why.
Not any specific Jewish reason. Just I like it, and I used to eat it since I was a boy. Not every day, of course, but often enough.
Barley soup?
Barley soup, yes, it
Barley
is
soup,
very good.
right.
And I had it, I don't remember last time, just a couple of weeks maybe ago again. I don't, maybe a week ago.
Yeah, they serve a pretty good barley soup at FSS and up in Livingston.
Barley, not only barley, some other stuff in
Yeah,
the soup.
of course. Okay, but barley in ancient times was not primarily for human consumption.
I'm human, I did consume it.
Barley was for animals.
Maybe I'm animal.
Okay, and that's because it was easy to grow, it was cheap, and it wasn't used for a lot of other purposes other than, like, as we know, like for soup. We don't have a lot of things with barley in our diet. Okay, but we do have a lot of things with wheat in our diet. So wheat is something that humans eat, and barley was seen as something primarily for animals. Now just keep that in mind as we kind of go through some more of the text, and let's see how the rabbis, this is part of what I love about the rabbinic literature, how the rabbis are, if you will, playful, but for a purpose. Okay, so let's take a look at this statement by Mordechai Yosef Leiner of Izbika. Okay, I'm sure a place that all of us have traveled to. Okay, and I'm sure we've all studied the writings of Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Leiner. Okay, let's see what he has to say in reference to this. Anybody want to read it for us? Go ahead.
The eating of the egg is a hint to the two redemptions of, is that supposed to be Yisrael? Or
Yep, should be Israel.
Okay. The physical redemption from slavery in Egypt and the spiritual redemption from the Torah was received. How does the egg hint of both of these? All creatures are born complete at birth, except for the egg. When the egg is laid, it is not completely born. It still needs to be hatched with a second process until it is a chick. Just as the chick is born with a birth after the birth, so too with Am Yisrael. When Yisrael left Egypt, their exodus was a birth. The first birth, Rabbi Abba ban Kamna said in the name of our rabbis, as the fetus is cut down in the bowels of the beast, and just as the shepherd gives his hand and drops from its bowels, so the Holy One, blessed be he, did to Israel in Egypt to remove them. And as an egg that appears to be a golem, just inside it is found a force to bind the chick. So Israel, at the time of their departure from Egypt, was given the first strength and the ability to be born next to it, and it came to them at the time of the giving of the Torah.
Wow. That's a lot to say about an egg, right?
Yeah.
But of course, Mordechai Yosef Leiner has something that he considers more important for us to learn and to understand, okay, which is that redemption has to be both physical and spiritual, and that according to him, like the egg, they are both birthing moments. I suspect when we look at the egg on the Seder plate going forward, we'll look at it differently than we ever have before. Okay, because usually what do we think of when we think of the egg on the Seder plate?
We think of the world, the wholeness of the world.
Right, wholeness of the world, springtime, birth, okay? But we often do not associate it with redemption. Okay. By the way, our Christian brothers and sisters see redemption as a birthing experience. That's why whenever you hear Christians refer to themselves as born again, okay, it means they have died a spiritual death and then are born anew, clean, And that's why they go into the mikveh, so to speak, the baptismal font.
Is that Easter eggs? Does that also have to do with that?
Well, in the same way that that eggs have to do with Passover as well,
Right.
because those are both the times. Remember, what the critical moment is not Jesus's birth. The critical moment is Jesus's rebirth. That's when he, according to Christian doctrine, that's when he became Messiah. Okay, so that notion of eggs and birth and renewal, okay, of course, along with the fact that they take place, both holidays, Easter and Passover, take place in the spring, which probably means that there were ancient celebrations before Judaism and Christianity came into effect about the power of spring each time of the year, each year. And we can understand that. We have been robbed of spring this year. We're still very much in the midst of winter.
Gorgeous outside.
In fact, I don't know about you, but I'm still wearing my winter clothes. Okay. I only put shorts on once so far, and it's the middle of May. Okay, and I'm still, every morning I'm getting up and I'm thinking, I got to put on a sweater, or or a shirt to cover my shirt, or I got to put on a jacket. And usually when spring comes along, I can't wait to put away the winter clothes. Okay, so spring has always had a power to it, and in this case, what we have here in the reference to the egg, okay, is the notion of two moments of birthing, and that it becomes important to count the days between them, because those are days filled with great anticipation. Okay, when do we have something similar to that in our Jewish calendar? During the month of Elul.
Between Yom Kippur and Sukkot?
Well, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur more significantly, although Sukkot is also mentioned in the Torah. But Elul is the critical time. Why does that become a critical time? Because remember, what happens, Moses goes up at the top of the mountain. He comes down when? On Shavuot, right? Well, and then what does he see?
Golden calf.
He sees the golden calf. He sees idolatry. Okay. We are permitted to break every one of the 613 mitzvot except for two. Okay, we can break the Shabbat in order to save a life. Okay, we can eat ham in order to save a life. Okay, my father-in-law died when he was just short of 100. He used to tell me, he grew up in an Orthodox home, and he used to tell me that when he went off to war, his father said to him, "Now I expect you to eat only kosher food, except when you have to save your own life. And then it's okay to eat non-kosher food." Okay? And he always remembered that statement from his father. Okay? He didn't know until I told him that it was rabbinically permitted, not just from his father, but because of the notion of saving one's life. Okay, so Moses comes down on Shavuot. What does he do? He sees this terrible event, right? And what does he do? He throws down the tablets, right? He smashes them. Okay. And then, by the way, does anyone know what happens to those smashed tablets? All of the pieces of those tablets are later put into the Ark of the Covenant along with the new tablets. They weren't discarded. They were considered to be sacred, and so they were put in with the new tablets. Now, he goes back up to the top of the mountain. And he spends all of his days acquiring the tablets again. And the people of Israel spend their days trying to overcome their sin, getting ready for repentance. How long is Moses back up on the top of the mountain? 40 days. How many? 40 days.
40 days.
Okay? 40 days. And when he comes down, what day is it when he comes down? It's Yom Kippur. But we don't, and the only counting that we have is, for the 40 days, the month that precedes Rosh Hashanah, the month of Elul, and then the 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur, the 40-day period. That's the period of repentance. And we're supposed to start beginning with the month of Elul. We're supposed to add into our worship services prayers for repentance. We're supposed to blow the shofar, okay, to prepare us for that time when we will, in effect, be at the same moment as the Israelites when they received the second set of tablets. Okay, let's take a look at the next text, a text from Rabbi Aryeh Carmel. Don't pay any attention to the book. The title won't mean anything for you, but let's read the text. So Carol, if you're doing such a good job, read the text for us, please.
Okay. The Omer on Pesach was from the barley harvest. The offering on Shavuot was of wheat. Barley is mainly food for animals. Wheat is food for human beings. The Torah hints to us that physical independence by itself still leaves man, from the Torah perspective, on the animal level. The counting of the 49 days signifies a sevenfold refining process and marks our progress to full human status with our acceptance of the Torah at Sinai, 7 weeks after the Exodus.
Howard.
Okay, I read that text and I said, wow. A 7-week, sevenfold refining process. Okay, it's not about refining of the barley to be used for us.
Anything to say?
It's a refining of our own souls. How would you describe a refining period for our own souls? By the way, I think all of us have had it. How many weeks have we been quarantined now?
More than 7 weeks.
But about, okay.
More.
We've had a lot of time to think about a lot of things.
Mm.
What's important to us? What's no longer important to us? The power of community, both because we've figured out how to have it, even if it's only virtually. And similarly, the power of community when we don't have it, and what that means for us. Yesterday, I did a funeral. Dave Golish's mother, 100 years old, had passed away. And so we did the funeral. And let's see, there was Dave and Renee and Dave's sister and Dave's daughter and Dave's 2-year-old grandson, Zachary. And then there was an iPad that was connected to Zoom for family members to be able to watch. And none of us ever touched. We all stood around the grave and shared together in the rituals of Jewish funeral, including Kaddish. And there was this beautiful little grandson, okay, who knew of his great-grandmother, knew her as Nana Dot, but probably won't remember very much of her going forward. And this was his first experience ever at a cemetery. So I said to his mother, see if you can find a small stone to pick up. And when I tell you to, bring him to the open grave and have him place it in the grave. So we found the stone. He held on to it, you know, like it was precious until the time came towards the end of the service. And then his mother brought him over and he placed it into the grave. Okay. And she said to me, what's the meaning of that? And I said, it's tucking in. And she thought for a minute and she said, oh, I really like that. I think when we place, we don't put shovels of dirt on the grave. We place shovels full of earth. Earth is living. It's warm. It's physical. Okay. And when we place shovels of earth on the casket, we're not just throwing dirt into the grave. What we're doing is we're regaining our ability to have physicality and symbolically tucking in our loved one. You know, actually, when I have kids who are older, I ask them, so when you go to bed at night, do your parents just say, "Do you go to bed?" They always say, no. I said, well, what do they do? Oh, they tuck us in. They say, good night, I love you. I said, well, yes, and that's what we do when we're here at the cemetery, okay? We're not just saying, you know, go to bed to our loved one. We're tucking them in.
To the cemetery.
And doing it in the most beautiful way that we know how.
Rocks.
Okay, now,
It's beautiful.
I think I mentioned that because in some ways, it's a refining process that we all go through. It is the difference between, excuse me, but the difference between eating barley and consuming wheat. That the barley primarily is used for the animals. And the wheat is what is used for us because we have to go through a process of refining in order to go from being the animal to becoming the human being. Or in order to go from the first birthing of the egg to the spiritual birthing of the egg. We don't become complete. The egg doesn't become complete until it hatches its chicks. Just as we don't become complete until we actually become human. Okay, now let's hold on to that for a minute. Let's take a look at.
I ask you a question.
Of course.
This what we just read. I was just at this moment I was thinking, comparing this egg and after that spiritual birth and so on. I was comparing with opinion when human and basically any kind of high level animal becomes alive. Because we think that when the child is born, he becomes alive. Christian opinion, Catholic and some other Christians, many Christians opinion, that birth is at the time of conceiving. It caused a lot of political discussions, but I was thinking that maybe that is comparable to what we just read about egg, birth, and after that spiritual birth. And what is your opinion?
Well, in some ways, it's very consistent with Jewish law. We don't consider a person to be a human being alive until after they are actually born.
Yeah.
That's one of the great distinctions between us and Christianity. Okay, we don't. In fact, we don't. We're kind of conflicted over this. If a baby boy is born prematurely and dies, some in the rabbinic community say you circumcise that baby.
After death?
Okay, even after death. Why? Because the circumcision is what makes the baby a Jew.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's not practiced by most of us today. Although I remember some years ago, I was dealing with a family, and actually the mother was carrying twins, and it was getting complicated, and it was clear that one of the babies was not going to survive. And how they did this, I don't know, but she gave birth to that baby, and then a couple of days later, she actually gave birth to the other baby. But the doctors came in and said to her, even if we don't believe this baby will survive 24 hours, but even if it does, it would be nothing more than a vegetable. Well, as it turns out, a very good friend of the family was a Moil. And the Moil said to me, ask the family if they want me to circumcise this baby even after he dies. So it's part of the notion that in traditional families, if you ask what's the baby's name, they won't tell you until the bris, because that's when the naming takes place. Okay? In traditional Judaism, there are no funeral rites for babies that die within the first month of their life. Okay, unlike the fact that we have funeral rites for everybody, regardless of the reason for their death. Okay? Some would even, there is this notion that if you get a tattoo, you can't be buried in the Jewish cemetery. There's nothing in Jewish law that says that. And besides, if that were the case, what would you do with all of the people who survived the Holocaust who had tattoos? You tell them they couldn't be buried in Jewish cemeteries. So we know that that's a Baba Misa intended to convince young people not to get tattoos. And for quite a long time it worked, until we began to discover that Israelis were getting tattoos like crazy. And so now we've given up that fight, so to speak. And we no longer say to somebody, if you get a tattoo, you won't be allowed to be buried in your cemetery, because all those young people who are getting tattoos know it just isn't so. So yes, we have a real distinction between Christianity and Judaism. Okay, and again, here this also comes to the notion of sinning. In Christianity, the moment you come through the birth canal is the moment that you have acquired the equivalent of the original sin. By the way, most people don't understand this. When they think of the Immaculate Conception, who are they talking about? Most Christians.
Jesus.
That's right. That's who most of them are talking about. But it's not correct. Okay. The Immaculate Conception was his mother's conception. She was born without sin, so that when he was born and came through the birth canal, he didn't acquire that sin. By the way, I once had this argument with a Catholic priest friend of mine. Okay, he told me I was absolutely wrong, and I said to him, "Go
Check it out.
talk to whoever was your teacher at seminary." And he came back and he said to me, "Oh my God, I've been teaching my flock all these years the wrong thing." He said, "They'll never forgive me." So, and in Judaism, when we come through the birth canal, we are born innocent. Okay, but we possess two inclinations or two wills, the will to do good and the will to do evil, the Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov. And then depending on how we fulfill the mitzvot, we either allow the Yetzer Tov, the will to do good, to flower, or we allow the Yetzer Tov to overtake us. Okay, now, so let's take a look at this text by Rabbi Yaakov ben Rabbi Asher. Okay, Carol, our reader, go ahead.
Fine. My grandson's name is Asher, so that's
great.
There are those who explain that the reason for the counting of the Omer is that the days of the Omer are the days of harvesting, and the people are busy working in the fields and are not in their homes. They could therefore not be reached by the messengers of the courts to be informed when the new month begins. God therefore commands us to count the days.
Okay, so people are so busy going to work that they don't have time for the counting of the Omer. And in ancient days, they didn't have calendars, and they didn't have Apple Watches, and so Rosh Chodesh was really important because that's how you knew where you were in relation to time and in relation to the seasons. Okay, so the going to work, the busy time of the harvesting was a kind of enslavement to worldly activities as opposed to otherworldly activities. Okay, and so the Omer becomes important because this 50-day period, 49 plus 1, okay, is the time for going from being enslaved in Egypt to becoming free, not getting through the Red Sea, but real freedom, meaning acquiring the Torah at Sinai. That's the key. Now, let's take a look at the next text, a very powerful one, and it really tells us why the 33rd day becomes so important. And who would have known when they declared that Lag BaOmer should be observed every year, that we would be living through something like we are experiencing today. Okay, so Carol, read it for us.
It is said that Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of disciples from Gabat to Atapharis, and they all died at the same time because they did not treat each other with respect. The world remained desolate until Rabbi Akiva came to our masters in the south and taught the Torah to them, and it was they who revived the Torah at that time. These were Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Judah, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Shamu. And it was they who revived the Torah at that time. A Tanakh taught, all of them died between Passover and Pentecost. Rabbi Haman bar Abba, or it might be said Rabbi Chaya bar Abin, said, all of them died a cruel death. What was it? Rabbi Nachum replied, diphtheria.
Man.
Got our own diphtheria.
Okay, right. They all died from a pandemic. Now, in this case, what was the nature, what brought about the pandemic?
Lack of respect.
Lack of respect for each other. Sound familiar? Have we ever lived in such a hyper-partisan time as the one we're living in now? We can't even talk to each other until we find out where the other stands on certain subjects. Right? Sometimes we gotta We got to check out to see if they respond to the code. Because we can't say like, we don't like Trump, because that doesn't reveal to us who they are. Okay, so we have to be more politic, you know, more PC to find out whether or not we can say that. We can talk about Republicans, or vice versa. We can talk about the Democrats, because we can only do it with people who treat each other with respect. Okay, and I think what this text is telling us is that the politics of the day had become so ruptured that in effect, they stopped thinking about the general health of the community. And that brought about the pandemic, or as Rabbi Nachman says, the diphtheria. They stopped focusing on the general health and welfare of the community. Now, I want to introduce you to a colleague and a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Michael Birnbaum, who probably most of you do not know. But Michael Birnbaum was originally engaged by our peanut farmer president, who was going to create a museum to the Holocaust. And so Michael Birnbaum, as he was known to his friends, moody, because he always appeared to be very forlorn and moody. And so it made great sense that he should specialize in Holocaust studies. He went to work for the Carter administration and was really the designer of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, which would become an educational institution, very different than the original Holocaust Memorial in Israel. Okay, and he set in motion all subsequent Holocaust museums that have been created, including the new section of Yad Vashem, which is completely an educational experience, unlike the original Yad Vashem located right next to it. I had invited him to come to be a scholar in residence in New Brunswick because I thought it would be interesting for the people to learn about the process. And when he arrived on Friday afternoon, I said to him, "So what's new?" And he said to me, "I just quit." I said, "What do you mean you just quit?" He said, "I just quit. I resigned from my position at the White House. So now I can say whatever I want, and I can't wait to talk to your people." And did he talk about how they were trying to politicize the Holocaust? I mean, he wanted it to be pure and whatever. Anyways, Michael today is at the American Jewish University in Los Angeles. He's written a number of books, of course, on the Holocaust and on Holocaust education, and that's his specialty. And he wrote this piece just the other day, and I'd like to share it with you. And if you don't mind, I'm going to be the reader of it. Let me allow me to articulate his words. He says, according to the Talmud, 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, about whom we just learned, died of the plague during the Omer, and the plague ceased for but one day. In other words, like Governor Cuomo has said, they went over the mountain, okay, and were coming down, but for one day. Okay, Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer. And Jews traditionally remembered this tragic period by refraining from haircuts and weddings and from celebrations and music. Lag BaOmer was the sole exception. what have we been refraining from during this period of counting?
Haircuts.
Haircuts.
Celebrations.
Right.
Okay, Carol's not doing any weddings because the license bureaus are closed.
Right.
Okay, in some states, they're trying to figure out how to let the clerk issue wedding licenses by allowing couples to come on by Zoom calls.
Oh my.
Okay, from celebrations and music, there are no concerts going on. Okay, it's very similar to what we're experiencing now. Parenthetically, he goes on to say, in the Holocaust, the Omer was the most intense period of killing. Hungary was invaded by the Germans in March of 1944, within 10 days of Purim. Passover, 5704, was not a time of liberation, but of ghettoization, and between the 15th of May and the 8th of July, 1944, 437,000 Jews were deported on 147 trains, destination Auschwitz. 4 out of every 5 were gassed upon arrival. So in effect, this was a second plague that afflicted the Jewish people at this season. And this one was without a day's reprieve. It's appropriate that these days be marked by extra sadness. He then goes on to talk about how Lag BaOmer is observed today, and in the traditional community, it's when the child is 3 years old. On Lag BaOmer, he gets his first haircut, and as we know, there are bonfires, especially in Meron, which is not far from Tzfat, at the grave of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. And of course, Lag BaOmer traditionally is the only day when young couples can get married between Passover and Shavuot. Now, he then says, we who have been shut in, unable to attend school or go to work, unable to attend synagogue or to shop because of the social distancing required to slow the progress of the COVID-19 pandemic, can appreciate as never before this historical memory and the exaltation that must have marked the day the plague ceased, even if it was but for one day. For rabbinic Jews, human suffering had a divine message. Human anguish is perceived as divine punishment, personal and communal. In truth, this is one aspect of rabbinic teaching that haunts me and that challenges me, one that I protest and one with which I contend. Having spent my life studying the Holocaust, I cannot regard what happened to the Jews as punishment for their iniquities, nor am I willing to see Hitler, the Nazis, their collaborators and enablers as instruments of God. But let's set that argument aside for another day. There have been people who have asked me if I thought, or if I think, that this is a kind of punishment that God is inflicting upon us, this pandemic that we're experiencing. And you can be sure that there are those in either Jewish or Christian evangelical communities who are suggesting the same thing. As a religious Jew, I stand within my tradition and engage its sacred days year after year, contending with them and wrestling with them and experiencing them anew year by year. Even if they do not change, I do change from year to year. My experience of life changes, and this year I am particularly struck by what rabbinic tradition presents as the reasons for the plague. Rabbi Akiva's students did not have enough regard one for another. The words resonate anew for me this year, as while I am not sure that this is the reason for the plague that we are currently experiencing, and then he puts in bold, and I've highlighted it, I am certain that the only way to defeat this plague is to have enough regard one for another.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing, right?
Mm-hmm.
The same thing that Rabbi Ben Asher said. And then he concludes with this: enough regard to observe social distancing, enough regard to care for one another, enough regard to find new and creative ways to comfort the afflicted, to visit the sick, to care for the needy, to provide for the widow and orphan, to feed the hungry, to educate the child, to be alone, and yet find a way not to be lonely. We desperately need enough regard to pull together, even as we are apart, and not to pull apart by coming together without regard for one another. We have seen remarkable heroism by those on the front lines who have enough regard to staff and clean our hospitals, to treat those who are ill, even as they might pose a danger, to deliver our food, to stock our shelves, to work day and night to identify and combat the disease, to patrol our streets, and to identify, order, manufacture, and deliver what is needed to save lives and to protect the people saving lives. And we need leaders who have enough regard for the intelligence and the collective wisdom of their people to tell us the truth, to demand the best of us, so that we can come through this moment in history together with enough regard for one another. Pretty powerful statement.
Yes.
Who would have thought that Lag BaOmer would have such incredible significance for us? Okay, now let's turn to the biblical passage.
Add to what we just heard, what you read, what I see even more important reason why we should obey social distancing, staying at home, and so on and so on. I see extremely important reason. Just one step to explain why not only I see it as something extremely important. As we know, there were occasions, and the last two occasions I had like a few days ago, a week ago, whatever, that in New York City, a doctor and a nurse, I think male nurse, but doesn't matter, but female doctor probably. Anyway, they committed suicide because they had to do what generally is done during war when it is a well-organized medical help, triage, that they have to decide to whom to provide medical help and to whom not, because facilities and
Right.
whatever they can do is limited.
Right.
Therefore, in order to prevent something like that, especially the need for people to die because they cannot get medical help because medical system is overwhelmed, it is necessary to try not to overwhelm them. Therefore, to obey distancing and being at home and so on, and not trying to protest that. And we heard about such protests. Some of them were about, by the way, among Jews, but many of them about non-Jews, so especially. And therefore, to save lives of those who will not get medical help because of overwhelming medical system, and also not to force medical people, doctors and nurses and so on, to be in such position that they have to decide whom to die.
Yeah. You know, I assume you all know that the reform movement about a week ago announced that it would close all of its summer camps this summer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and undoubtedly, all the other Jewish organizations are going to do the same thing. Private camps are waiting a little bit longer, but my guess is that most, if not all of them, will close as well. What they don't say, but which is a reality for why they made the choice, is that the hospitals and the medical centers that are located that serve these camps simply would be overwhelmed if the number of cases of COVID-19 were to be coming out of those camps.
Mhm.
Okay? These are small, I don't even want to call them community hospitals. They're small hospitals. They're places you go to get your, a broken bone repaired. But if you need any real surgery, you're sent to the larger city. One of my grandsons 2 summers ago had appendicitis at Camp Harlan. And he was sent to the hospital in Allentown, about an hour away, which is ultimately where he had his appendix taken out, and then went back to camp. Okay, but the local hospitals would simply not be able to handle the medical crisis, and as you said, in times of war, the doctors practice triage. Okay, which are the ones that they think are most likely to be able to save. Now, it's been interesting, but in recent years, a lot of my former students who've chosen to go into medicine have chosen to go into emergency medicine. They think it's the most exciting, at least they did until this pandemic. They thought it was the most exciting medical career to go into. Now, they did practice in the emergency rooms even before this pandemic. They would practice triage. So you do know that if you have to go into the emergency room, okay, what's the first thing you say?
I'm insured.
What?
I'm insured.
Well, that certainly will help.
That's first. The second thing is what you're asking.
Right. The second thing is you say, I have chest pains. Okay? Because if you have chest pains, they think you're maybe having a heart attack, and they gotta and if you're having a heart attack, they gotta deal with that right away. If you say I got a pain in my side, okay, they'll put you over on the side, and they'll get to you eventually. Okay, I've spent a fair amount of time in the emergency rooms over the course of the years. Okay, and I've seen who comes in, who gets put on the side, who gets taken, dealt with right away, including me. When I didn't say I have chest pains, they put me on a gurney, they put me on a side, and 2 days later they did surgery. They took out my gallbladder. Okay, you can wait. Okay, so I think this is, anyways, it's part of the time we're living in. All right, now to take a look at Bechukotai. Okay, this is actually one of the weeks of a double Torah portion, Bahar, Bechukotai. In Bahar, it's mostly talking about specific things related to the temple and to sacrifice, but Bechukotai begins to change things. Okay, so Carol, if you'll read it for us, if you wish, you can skip over the Hebrew.
The what? I didn't hear you. You can skip over the what?
You can skip over the Hebrew if you wish.
Oh, okay. You shall not make idols for yourself, or set up yourselves carved images or pillars, or place figured stones in your hand to worship upon, for I, the Lord, am your God. You shall keep my Sabbath and venerate my sanctuary, mine, the Lord's. If you follow my laws and faithfully observe my commandments, I will grant your rain in their seasons, so that the earth shall yield its produce, and the trees of the field their fruit. Your threshing shall overtake the vintage, and your vintage shall overtake the sowing. You shall eat your fill of bread and dwell securely in your land. I will grant peace in the land, and you shall lie down untroubled by anyone. I will give the land respite from vicious beasts, and no sword shall cross your land. I will look with favor upon you and make you fertile and multiply, and I will maintain my covenant with you. You shall eat old grain long stored, and you shall have to clear out the old to make room for the new. I will establish my abode in your midst, and I will not spurn you. I will be ever present in your midst. I will be your God, and you shall be my people. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt to be their slaves, to be their slaves no more, and who broke the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect.
Okay, pause there. Thank you. Well done. Okay, so there's an if. Yeah.
But, in this is what we see that, certain people say why there was a Holocaust, because we didn't do what we were supposed to do, more or less blaming it on us.
Okay, so the power of this particular passage in the Torah is that it appears to be, there's a conditional. If you do this, then I will do this, right? By the way, we'll see here, I'll just give you a little hint. If you do not obey me, okay, we'll read that in just a second, okay? So if you don't do this, then something's going to happen. Okay, but I want you to focus for a moment on the last sentence that we read. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out from the land of the Egyptians to be their slaves, who broke the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect. Who made you walk erect?
God.
Right. I, God, made you walk erect. Okay. I made you stand tall. Right?
Is that to separate us from the beasts, from the animal world, to make us unique?
Maybe, but we're going to see here in a minute that it's something that's even more graphic than just separating the beasts. Okay, so the if you do this, great. I'm going to give you all these things that Carol just read. But if you do not obey me, and you do not observe all these commandments, if you reject my laws and spurn my rules, so that you do not observe all my commandments and you break my covenant, then I in turn will do something else to you. I'll wreak misery upon you, consumption and fever, which cause your eyes to pine and the body to languish. You shall sow your seed to no purpose, for your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you. You shall be routed by your enemies, and your foes shall dominate you, and you shall flee, though none pursues. And if for all that you do not obey me, I will go on to discipline you sevenfold for your sins, and I will break your proud glory. I will make your skies like iron and your earth like copper. Sounds pretty frightening, right? Quite a threat. Quite a threat. Does God ever say here, and I'll reject you and find another people?
No.
No, it's right. Okay, Gene, you're absolutely right. No. God does not say, I will reject. I'll punish you, but I'm not going to reject you. Now, let's quickly jump over to the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah says the following. Okay, Carol, read it for us.
I will put it in the hands of your tormentors who have commanded you, get down that we may walk over you, so that you made your back like the ground, like a street for passerby.
Okay, now, does that sound like our being like animals? Can you see the visual image? Okay, let's see if I can find it here again. I gotta just find the piece from Sforno. I think it's on the previous page. Yeah. Okay. In Egypt, the Torah suggests This is from a book, The Heart of Torah, by Rabbi Shai Held, one of the great, very wise contemporary commentators of the Torah today. The Torah suggests the Israelites were so abused and exploited under Pharaoh's brutal reign that they were reduced to beasts of burden. But Rabbi Obadiah Seforno, who lived in the beginning of the 16th century, explained that the Israelites, get a load of this picture, the Israelites were forced to lie prostrate on the ground while others walked on them, treating, quote, their back like the ground, like a street for passers-by.
You go on and see well all the places.
Imagine. Okay. In other words, they were the Egyptians saw the Israelites as having even less value than animals. You wouldn't walk over an animal. If an animal was dead, you'd walk around it. But the people were just lying as if dead on the streets, and you just walked on top of them, walking over them. Now, in freeing the slaves, God removed the yoke that had so oppressed them, enabling them to stand tall for the first time in centuries. Sforno said, the aptness of the biblical metaphor is apparent. A person who is subjugated, upon whom a yoke is placed, is bent over. Once the bars are broken, he then can stand at full stature. Liberated from their torment, the Israelites could finally stand upright, unafraid of any creatures. Now, what does Isaiah say? Carol, read the next section. Awake, awake.
Awake, O Zion, clothe yourself in splendor. Put on your robes of majesty, Jerusalem, holy city, for the uncircumcised and the unclean shall never enter you again.
Go ahead.
Arise, shake off the dust, sit on your throne, Jerusalem. Loose the bonds from your neck, O captive one, fair Zion. For thus said the Lord, you were sold for no price and shall be redeemed without money. For thus said the Lord God, of old my people went down to Egypt to sojourn there, but Assyria has robbed them, giving nothing in return. What therefore do I gain here? Declared the Lord. For my people has been carried off for nothing. Their mockers howl, declares the Lord, and constantly, unceasingly, my name is reviled. Assuredly, my people shall learn my name. Assuredly, they shall learn on that day that I, the one who promised, am now at hand. How welcome on the mountains are the footsteps of the herald announcing happiness, heralding good fortune, announcing victory, telling Zion, your God is king. Hark, for your watchmen raises their voices. As one they shout for joy, for every eye shall behold the Lord's return to Zion. Raise a shout together, O ruins of Jerusalem, for the Lord will comfort his people, will redeem Jerusalem.
You know what the last words on Yom Kippur are before the final blast of the shofar? We say, Adonai hu ha-Elohim. We declare Adonai is God. Okay, it comes right before that. We say the Shema 7 times, and then the Baruch Shem Kavod 3 times, and then we say Adonai hu ha-Elohim 7 times, and then we blast the shofar. Okay, it is standing tall. We are We remain in covenant with God, no matter what we or God might do. We are still in covenant. And the question is how to come back and fulfill that covenant. Okay, let's take a look at Ezekiel. Ezekiel, for those of you who may not remember, Ezekiel was one of those prophets who probably smoked a lot of pot. Okay, Ezekiel had these flashes of radiance that the average person, had no idea what was going on. Okay, but this is what Ezekiel says. Go ahead, Carol.
Like the appearance of the bow which shines in the clouds on the day of rain, so was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. That was the appearance of the semblance of the presence of the Lord. When I beheld it, I flung myself down on my face, and I heard the voice of someone speaking. And he said to me, O mortal, stand up on your feet, that I may speak to you.
Okay.
As he spoke to me, a spirit entered into me and set me upon my feet, and I heard what was being spoken to me.
Ezekiel said, I suddenly found myself in the presence of God, and what did I do? I went down on the ground. And what did God say? Get up. Okay? You can't hear or understand anything that I'm about to tell you if you have a slave mentality. If you are a servant to idolatry. Okay, if the materialism of your time is so rampant that you lose all sight of the poor and the needy and the stranger. Right? I don't know, but on one hand, I can't stand watching the television. On the other hand, I'm glued to it. Okay, I got to watch Governor Cuomo because he gives me hope in the midst of despair. Okay, and then I gotta watch the other shows, and I'm seeing these long lines of cars waiting to get food. Okay, and I'm overwhelmed by it, absolutely overwhelmed by it, because I, and I'm sure all of you, have figured out a way to be able to get around the fact that we can't go into the supermarkets. We're still getting the food delivered. Right? Not so for these other folks. Okay, who it's not even a question of where they're going to get the next paycheck from. Okay, even if they don't know where they're going to get their next meal from. So it's incredibly powerful, right? And here's the theological piece in all of this. God, in effect, is saying, if you want to blame me, go ahead and blame me. But it's not going to get you it's not going to do you any good. Okay, I'm not leaving you anyways. And I'm not letting you off the hook. Okay? That's cheap grace if you blame me. Okay? You have to take responsibility for what you do to each other, one human being to another. Okay, you have to have ownership of it. That's the covenant that I set with your ancestors. Okay, that would be an everlasting covenant, an eternal covenant. Now, rather than giving you my interpretation of my words, I'm going to ask Rabbi Held to speak to us as we come close to the end here.
The initial encounter between God and Ezekiel captures something essential about Jewish theology and spirituality more broadly. On the one hand, faced with the very thought of God, let alone the direct presence thereof, we are overcome. Who are we to stand in the presence of God? Leviticus describes the whole people experiencing something similar. witnessing a divine fire consuming a sacrifice placed upon the altar. All the people saw and shouted and fell to their faces.
By the way, that's what we're experiencing. Okay, we're all falling to our faces. Okay, we're not, we're not figuring out how to protest, how to demand that the federal government does what it needs to do. Okay, we're falling on our faces. Go ahead.
But lying on our faces in awe cannot be the whole story. Like Ezekiel, we are asked to stand up, because if we fail to do so, we cannot act in the world and cannot embrace the full dignity implied by living in covenant with God. Since God wants something from us to keep God's commandments and to help turn the world into a place where God can dwell, God wants and needs us to stand tall, yet without losing the impulse to remember our utter minuteness in comparison with God's majesty and grandeur. No longer exploited laborers, we are now called to be dignified covenantal partners. What God wants from us is not servility, but service. The
Wow.
requirement.
Wait, before you go on, that's a pretty powerful statement, right?
Yep.
Pretty powerful statement.
The requirement to stand tall rather than only to lie down on our faces is crucial for understanding the audacity of biblical faith. On the one hand, one can hardly overstate the centrality of obedience in the Torah. Again and again, Israel is charged to hear and follow God's commandments and threatened with dire consequence if it fails to do so. Yet on the other hand, it is vital to recall that obedience is not obsequiousness. As Bible scholar Walter Brueggemann puts in conventional flat monarchical monotheism, obedience may be taken as an unquestioning, consistent, submissive conformity to God's mandate, but not so in Israel, because God is not known in Israel to be an unengaged, demanding monarch. Rather, God, even as judge and king, is a dialogical, covenant-keeping partner in the life of Israel.
Okay, so what do we have here? This is, I think, part of the power of our faith. Okay, we have a God who at times, okay, acts like us with jealousy, okay, anger, some of the same human qualities that we hope none of us possess, but we understand that at times we do. And it would be all too easy for us to either reject God because of that behavior, or to simply say we don't understand God's ways, and so we just live with blind faith. Okay? And similarly, God is in a relationship with us in which God probably says, I don't get it. Okay, I gave them all the tools to be able to create another Garden of Eden. And they spend their time, building instruments of war, or where the some want to have it all and only want to dole out a little bit to the many. And here, what Held is saying to us is that this is a covenant-keeping partnership between God and Israel. Okay, it's not a if you, then I. It's not an either or. Okay, it's all together. Now, here, let's read the last 3 paragraphs here. God's covenant partners.
God's covenant partners are not too diffident to cry out and assert themselves. Moreover, such cries are not dismissed as unacceptable or blasphemous. On the contrary, they are an integral part of biblical faith. Laments assume the right to speak to God, and the legitimacy of the petitioner before God, right and legitimacy that are grounded in a mutuality of commitments. Amazingly, the Psalms insist that God characteristically accepts, honors, and responds to such cries of need. Those with whom God lives in relationship are not cowed into submission. Leviticus teaches us that to live in covenant with God is to stand tall, to serve God. The lives of Ezekiel and Moses instruct us is to act upon the world. If throwing ourselves on the ground is at times appropriate and necessary, so crucially is standing erect. Stand up, God effectively tells the prophet, and by extension, the rest of us. I'm talking to you. Indeed, if the Psalms are an indication, there are moments when self-assertion, the courage to express our needs, our yearnings, and our expectations before God is not only tolerable, perhaps even religiously indispensable. We are not by any stretch God's co-equals, but nor are we God's slaves. As God's servants and covenant partners, we are called upon to stand tall.
What do you make of that?
Wow.
Yeah. By the way, and that's how the book of Leviticus comes to an end, because Bechukotai is the last parsha in the book of Leviticus. The 27th chapter of Leviticus is like a Cliff's Notes to the rest of the book. There's really nothing new in the 27th chapter. We looked at the 26th chapter today. What we would say at the end of reading the book of Leviticus would be Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek. Okay, be strong, and become strengthened by becoming strong. Or to put it in the words that we have here from Ezekiel and from Shai Held, stand tall. Okay. And I love it where he says, where God says, stand up. I'm talking to you. Okay. That's, for me, that's the God that I believe in. Okay. The God who says, I don't care whether you believe in me or not. I'm talking to you. Stand up. Do something. Make something happen. By the way, we are, the Clergy Association in Westfield is meeting actually at 1 o'clock today for a report, because I can't remember which church it is. One of the churches is setting up a major food drive, and the churches and the synagogues are joining in. We may not be able to go into our building to conduct the regular day-to-day business, but we may be able to gather food, as you know, that folks like you and me can drive by, drop off food, which then will be transported over to the church and then distributed to the food banks that now are getting emptied out on a day-to-day basis. Okay? It's part of the notion of stand tall, do something. In other words, don't just lie over and let those who wish walk over you, walk on top of you, okay? Because you only have a slave mentality. Quite to the contrary, God or our faith demands that we stand tall and we do something. That, to me, is the real message of Bechukotai and Lag BaOmer in this particular year. Anybody have any responses, rebuttals? Hope I made my case, Your Honor.
You did. I find in your favor. I find in God's favor.
There you go. Right.
Rabbi?
Yep. Howard.
I find a lot of parallels also in raising our children. The similar in the relationship between God and us is our relationship with our children.
Yep.
While we are older and wiser, they still need to be respected. And when we are trying to teach them a lesson, they're not going to learn very much by lying down and crying or not listening. You want to get them to stand up, be a mensch, and listen to what I have to say. And I think it's a perfect analogy.
Yep, absolutely. You're right on the mark.
May I add a little bit to this analogy? I think it is a very good analogy, but I wouldn't say it's complete because as we just read and we can see on the screen at the bottom, we are God's servants. Children are not our servants. We are their servants while they're young and so on. When we are very old and they're, mature and adults, maybe they become our servants. But this is, I see, important difference. Despite overall, I agree with you.
So it's interesting. One of the things that I teach is what I call living in the land of the giants, which goes something like this: when we're small and we're young children, we live in the land of the giants. All of the people around us are giants. If we're really lucky, all of the giants that we experience are kind and benevolent. And so we say, oh, when I grow up, I'm going to be a giant just like them. Some of us grow up living in the land of the giants where the giants are not all kind and benevolent. They're mean and they're nasty. And some of us say, when I grow up, I'm going to be just like them. And I'll treat the little people the same way that I got treated. Some of us say, no, I'm not going to be like those people. I'm going to be a different kind of giant, either because I've experienced some of the good giants or because I imagine that there are some who are good giants. Some of us grow up in the land of the giants and say, when I grow up, I'm going to kill the giant. It's like Jack and the Beanstalk. Okay. Anyone here ever read the book, The Beanstalk Incident? It's told from the story of the giant, from the perspective of the giant. Okay. There's a series of books, I don't know if they're still available, but a series of books in which, depending on whether you open them English style or Hebrew style, the story, if you open them English style, told the traditional story, and if you open them from the Hebrew style or from the back first, it told the story from the perspective of the other. So the Beanstalk incident is told from the perspective of the giant. I was just walking along and all of a sudden this troublemaker came along and tried to do away with me. Okay, so anyways, some of us say, when I grow up, the only thing I can do is to kill the giant, because otherwise the giant will kill me. And some of us say, my experience from growing up in the land of the giants is I'll never become a giant. And I'm sure, like me, all of you have encountered people who appear to be grown-ups, but they have never become giants. They have continued to be little people. And that's how they live out their lives. I'll just share this with you. I had dinner with, I got invited to a basketball game some years ago by one of the members of my congregation in New Brunswick. Very generous man, very successful in business and in a family business. We agree that we will meet at a local restaurant in New Brunswick for dinner before we go to the game. So when the bill came, I said to the waitress, please give me the bill. And my friend said, oh no, you can't take the bill. I always take the bill. So I looked at him and I said to him, well, sometimes it's good to be the recipient and enjoy it because I'm taking the bill. So he smiled and he said to me, "Could you talk to my brother-in-law?" So we both had a great laugh. And then he said to me, "You know, for as long as I've known my brother-in-law, not once has he ever offered to pick up the tab. Never, never, not once." I said to him, "Well, so the next time that you go out to eat, you know, just say to him when you get the bill, you say, let's split it." And he smiled and he said, "You know, I really wish I could do that, but my wife would probably kill me." And I thought, "Oh, you poor guy," you know. But the brother-in-law never, you know, he never became one of the giants, and probably never will. So, okay. Anyways, good studying with you this morning. It's always a pleasure. Don't forget, we got Shabbat services Friday night, and I'm sure we've got lots of other good things coming up on the calendar. I just don't know what they are at the moment, but Temple Emanu-El continues to roll along, doing all of the things that it needs to and wants to, and most of all, trying both our lay leadership and our clergy and staff trying to make sure that we are there for everybody in the temple, to help in every way that we possibly can during this time of pandemic. So
You're doing a fabulous job.
thanks.
Fabulous job.
Thanks.
Have a healthy week to everybody.
Absolutely, everybody.
Well, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your
Enjoy.
time.
Enjoy.
Appreciate it. Be
I'm-
well.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Okay, see you all.
Have a good week, everyone. Be well.